Hi everybody, this is Kat Jackson with the Hobby Hangout, and I'm joined tonight by Caleb Wissenback from CK Studios. He's going to be sharing some information about painting black armor with us and hopefully share some tools and tips and tricks that you guys can use. If you have any questions after the live broadcast of this, you can find us in the Hobby Hangout, or you can also find Caleb at his CK Studios Facebook page anytime. He's always willing to answer your questions. So, Caleb, turn it over to you.
Hey, everybody. So tonight, I guess we'll just get right into it, huh? Kat's already kind of handled the preamble. So I got more requests about the painting black, and at ReaperCon, I was painting on one of the Kabuki Stormtrooper girls things, and I went with an alternate color scheme. I wanted to go black, but I didn't do my normal black like what we did on the last recording with the shadow gray color and stuff like that. So I wanted to go a little more sci-fi, a little more flashy. And so I got a few requests on how I went about that. I guess we'll just get into it. It's a lot like the same technique that I used before. We're still going to use a lot of the color theory and stuff like that in it. You'll notice my colors have changed just a little bit, and that's what I'm going to talk about, is how you can change your colors and still create the illusion of black, but be able to make it more interesting. We talked in the last class about how, or the last recording, we talked about how when you're painting black, we want to make sure that we're using like a red kicker color, and that we want to use like a blue gray or something like that to create a little more interest. Because if we just use pure grays, the model becomes very desaturated, it becomes very boring to look at. It almost looks like we're painting monochromatic. So when we add those colors in, because of the way that black works with ambient light, with reflection, with all of that stuff, that we want to make sure that we add colors. So we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to go a little further with our colors now. We're going to be a little more extreme into the blues. And so you'll notice that my red is tuned down quite a bit so that it doesn't clash too much because of the blues. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my other camera, and I'll show you the model that we're working on, that I'm working on tonight. All right, so here we are, and this is the Kabuki models Stormtrooper girl. Everybody's been painting her in white, and so I thought I would do something a little different, which was surprising because I've been painting a lot of white lately. If you guys saw the Titans and the Tau and all that stuff, I've been doing a lot of white, but I just decided to try something different with her, so I went in with to do kind of a more sci-fi looking model. So you'll notice here. So of course this is already pretty well done. You can see the top here is still just in the airbrush stage. This is the detailing stage right here. So I won't go through how I base coated, but instead of using that sky blue or that shadow gray that I used before, I went ahead and I grabbed a different color, and I used this soft blue from Reaper. And you'll notice when I put this on my palette that this color is very, it's a vibrant blue. It's not quite as soft, it's not quite as light as the that shadow blue that I used. It's still got a little bit of a gray tint to it, but as I start to kind of thin it out, you'll notice right here that it's very blue. So we're going to play with that kind of bright blue to trick the eye a little bit. So when you look at the model, you're not going to be quite sure if you were painting a blue model or a black model. When I first sprayed this in blue, of course I went over my zenithal highlighting. I'm always going to start my models with black undercoat. Then I come in and shoot my light with the zenithal highlighting. And then I come in, and after I've shot that light, I'm going to come in and I'm going to play with the colors. And you can see, especially here on the chest and stuff, you can really see how dynamic that blue is in there. It's really fading through on the shoulder and stuff. It really reads very blue. And at first that's kind of jarring, but it's not until you start to get the detail work in. And once I start to put these very bright white colors into it, that we actually fade away from the idea that it's blue. When we start to create that contrast, you can really see it on the helmet here. We have such a high contrast and really great light points that it still reads as black, even though the majority of the model is blue. Especially if you look at it right from the top of the helmet, you can see how much blue it's reading. But by creating that contrast and creating that depth, we're going to trick the eye into seeing blue. So that's what we're after tonight. So I went ahead and I base coat with my soft blue. And then I went in and I shot a shadow color. And I did this with the airbrush. Before, we just had that shadow blue. And then I went in and did some glazed washes to go in and create the shadows. With this, I actually took the airbrush. You can really see when you flip that model upside down, you can see how much of it got airbrushed. I really wanted to darken the recesses and create as much shadow as possible so that we can create as much contrast. Now with this, I didn't go with a pure black. Before, I was using pure black when I came in and did that base coat. But on this one, I went in and I used this corporeal shadow. This is a new color that Reaper put out. I think it might have been only available at the Reaper Con. So if you didn't get it, sorry. There's a couple of others that you can find out on the market. But what we're after, and you'll notice with this color, is it's just a very, very, very dark blue. But you can definitely see it's blue. It's not black. If I put a pure black next to it, you can really see the difference in color between a pure black and this really dark blue. So by coming in with this really dark blue and shooting those shadows in with the dark blue, it's already being shot over black. Because remember, when we base coated in black, and then we highlighted with white, did that zenithal highlighting. Now when I airbrush, I'm shooting right over that black with this dark blue. So a little bit of the black still feeds through, but it's still reading as blue. And this is really important because we need to create depth and vibrancy. You notice right here, this mask is very vibrant. You can really see that the darks are very dark and they really contrast to the lights. But then if you look at the chest, we don't have that going on. The darks are there, but they're not really dark. They're not really deep. We're lacking a little bit of depth. So of course, we're going to do that same trick that we did before, and we're going to introduce red. This time, because I have a really heavy blue base coat, I don't want to go with a bright red. If I put a bright red on it, it's going to read purple. It's going to become very, very purple. So instead, I'm using a very darkened red. This is that Gothic Crimson. Again, it's another one of the Reaper convention only colors. It's very similar to the scale 75 fantasy red, the dark red in the scale fantasy. It's a very purple red. I'm looking at my paints to see if there's another color that might be comparable to it. I know that burgundy wine is pretty close, but this is a little more purple than the burgundy wine. Maybe with the Andrea color, with the second shadow in the Andrea red set, this is pretty comparable. That's got a nice, you can see the kind of the blue tint to it. Right here, I don't know if it's reading that well in the camera, but you see there's just a touch of blue in it. So this is the color that we're going to use. I'm going to put this on my palette, and you'll see there, you can see how deep that red is. It's a very deep red. As I start to feather it off, you see how it's starting to turn into almost a purple. Instead of fading to a red when it's on the white paper, it almost fades to a purple. This is a really good red for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in, I'm going to create another glaze with this. I don't want to be too heavy-handed. And I'm going to go in and I'm just going to kind of trace in at my shadow points. And I'm going to roll it out just a little bit to where we hit those transition points. And that transition point, kind of like what we talked about in the last video, is that transition point where the pure black, I'm not on the screen. That transition point is where the pure black meets the gray black. So before we had that shadow gray with a little bit of black mixed in. This time it's that really dark blue. We're gonna meet right there where those two kind of come in. We want to be careful and we don't want to get it on these highlights. If we put this color into the highlights, you notice I'm avoiding this little strip right here. And on this side, you can see that little strip right there that's gonna catch my ambient light. I don't want to get it in there because it's gonna go over that lighter blue color, that lighter blue black, and we'll really get purple. So we want to make sure that we're just hitting these transition points where it's in the deepest shadow. We want to push that color into these shadows. Now here we have some ribbing that runs along the edge of the armor. We want to kind of outline that ribbing with this paint also. That way we're creating a depth of color. And it's just going to make our blacks read just a little bit darker. So we're starting to catch more contrast. So now, as you can already see, with just that little bit of adding red, we're starting to already catch a lot more kick, a lot more color transition with that. So now we can come back in with our blue. And we're just going to come in and reestablish some of those light points. And I'm just kind of lightly going to glaze back in. You know, this is that same thing that we were doing in the class before, or in the video before, where we're kind of just doing a sketch. I'm not really being that particular on making sure that I make it real smooth. I'm just mainly kind of setting that light. So I want to make sure that that light starts to set properly. Again, this is also a very thin down paint. I don't want it being real opaque because I need that red to show through a little bit. It's gonna kind of bleed through just a little bit. So we're gonna apply just a little more of that color here. Of course, along this ribbing, we want to reestablish this. And then I'm going to take this glaze and I'm just going to start to glaze over these highlights, being careful to avoid the brightest spots. And what this will do is it'll get rid of that powdery look. Whenever we airbrush onto something, whenever we're kind of doing that base coating and we shoot those airbrushed highlights on and stuff, we start to get just a little bit of powdery look. You know, it's that airbrush look. To get rid of that, we're just going to take that mid-tone color, which of course is this dark blue, and we're just going to lightly glaze, being careful to stay away from our highest highlights. And what this will do is it'll help to smooth out that transition. It won't be quite as glaring as it was before. We're going to start to soften that up. Then I'm going to take some of that really dark blue that I had, and I'm going to soften the transition to where I put in those highlights. And these are all with light, really light glazes. If you look at the paint that I'm painting, you can see how that didn't even really show up, but you can see how thin that paint is. I'm really lightly glazing that paint on. I don't want it being really thick. So I'm going to go in and just start to soften up these transitions a little bit. Kind of got some of that gray paint from our bodysuit right here, so I'm going to put some pure black in here to get rid of that. And I'll come back in with that dark gray blue and start to just kind of smooth. Okay, so we're starting to get our light to show just a little bit better. We're going to come in and just kind of reestablish a few things right here. And with this is a lot of back and forth. You know, tonight I won't spend too much time really smoothing, but off the camera, I'll probably sit here and do this back and forth for probably a good hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, just to get these transitions almost exactly perfect. And it does take a little while. Patience is your best thing for this. If we can not rush it, you'll start to see that everything will start to transition very nicely. We'll start to get really good color and really good movement and stuff. And then the other thing I like to do is kind of take the model and pull away from it a little bit and just see kind of where the light is transferring and how things look. Once I've done that and I'm kind of happy with where those shadows are, I'm going to come in and I'm going to establish my highlight points now. So what I'm using for my highlight is I'm using Ghost White. It's a blue tinted white, but I'm not going to paint pure Ghost White. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mix that in with the soft blue color that I'm using. I'm going to use those and I'm going to make some transition colors out of that. And I'll probably step about 2 or 3 times. By step, I mean like my first little bit will be like 90% soft blue, maybe 85% soft blue, and then just a little bit, 15-20% maybe tops of that white. So we're going to get kind of a little bit of a highlight color, and we'll just go in and start to place that highlight color. We want to make sure that it's not too big of a step. Before, when we were doing that model, we were really pushing our transitions and our highlights. So we went with very sharp, very fast highlights. You know, we talked about that with the little arcs of color and how fast your highlight's going to be. With this, because it's a more feminine shape, I want my transitions to be just a little smoother. Yes, I do have hard edges where the very edge of the armor catches a reflection, but you'll notice the transitions like across the leg or across the hip or down here along this breastplate or across these little, whatever these little parts of the armor is. You'll notice my transitions are a lot slower in this model. Because it's effeminate, we don't want as harsh of transitions. Harsh transitions kind of give a little more of a, I don't know how you put it. It's just harsher, you know. It's more brutal. If you look at the transitions here on this model, you can see, especially on the legs and stuff, the transitions are very fast. They're very sharp. They're very hot. His chest and stuff, the skin tones, the transitions are very fast. They're very hard. The shadows are very deep. The highlights are very, very bright. It creates a lot of tension, I guess. It's very aggressive. Whereas with a female model, we kind of want to be a little softer. Whenever we're doing like the highlights on a face, if we're going to go in and shadow the cheekbones and stuff, with a effeminate model, with a female model, we're going to be softer with those transitions. We're going to do the same thing with the armor. I know that sounds really odd, but you will actually. Hey, Trevor, how you doing?
This side is family.
So,
You still talk to me. My dad. You talk to him more than I do.
No, he never comments. He commented on one thing. That's all I've heard from him.
And that's more than I've heard.
we're catching
My
somebody's.
brother.
So, anyways, so even our armor can take on a gender, and I hate to say that it's not a gender, but definitely like a female model, you'd want to have a softer gender. You'd want to have softer transitions. We want to make the model a little smoother, a little softer. The transitions from the hips, the transition across the chest, stuff like that. As we smooth those out, it will take on that character of the model. So I guess get back to the point is that we want to make sure that we're really soft with our transitions here, and that we really work in that mid-tone, because that's where all of that transition is going to be. That's where the majority of the color of the model is going to be. We want to make sure that that's nice and smooth. So I'm going to work that back and forth. Now I will go back in and I'll add just a little bit of that red again and just kind of reestablish, because I put some of that blue over the top. I'm going to come in and reestablish again. And all this is going to do is just create more depth. The more we can go back and forth with this, the more volume and depth the model will take on. So I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but you can really kind of see where I've placed that red again. Once I'm done with that and I'm pretty happy with that transition in red, I'm going to go in with that pure black now. And I'm going to go into my deepest, darkest recesses and take that pure black. So right here, oop, I got just a little bit on that highlight. So I'm just going to clear my brush. And I'm going to try to glaze that out and just walk that black paint back off. It's okay if we get that black in there. We want to avoid getting the red over the highlights because it'll take on that purple tint. But you'll notice if you put a black over that highlight, all it does is just tone down that black. So don't be too concerned if you make a little bit of mistake with the black and you get that black on the highlights. All we do is just come back in and reestablish those highlights. And it'll be real fast. You'll notice that those highlights will reestablish really quick. It won't take too much work. So once we get that dark in, we might have to come in and just do just a little bit of touch up to bring our highlights back in. And again, I'm not going as bright and as sharp as I did with that other model. I want to make sure that I'm keeping everything relatively smooth. That's going to be the key to this model, is that those color changes we try to keep as smooth as possible. So finally, once I'm pretty happy with that, now I'm going to come in and add just a little bit more of that ghost white to that soft blue. So now I'm roughly looking at probably a 50-50, maybe not quite. And I'll just come in and I'll put in a couple more points of highlight. And I want to be careful not to go too far on that. You can see how bright that got. I mean, just a little bit goes a really long way on that. We want to be nice. We want to make sure that we're just kind of soft and gentle. Now, I'm not going to put that bright highlight in here. And a lot of people will do that, and you'll notice with like non-metallic metals, you're going to get a bright highlight right here at the darkest shadows. What that does, that really helps to give the idea of reflection, of how light is going to reflect ambient light. You're going to get reflected light. You're going to get all that stuff that happens on a model. I'm going to choose to not do it here, because if I start to put these bright highlights right here, you're going to get a couple bright highlights right here. This is going to be the focus of the model. And I want the helmet and I want her face to be the focus. And because we're dueling with that, where's her head at? Right here. You'll notice she's got a big pull of hair and everything that goes over her hair. Her face is kind of covered. You have this length of hair right here that's in front of her face, and then you also have the helmet that sets in front right here too. So we're kind of battling here. I guess I can kind of put it together so you get an idea of what I'm talking about.
Caleb, while you're doing that, one of the questions that comes up a lot when talking to people about painting whites and stuff is the chalkiness that shows up. Did you talk about how to kind of avoid that as we go lighter and lighter against a really dark color?
Yes. No, I didn't talk about it, but we can talk about that. This helmet will be a great example of that, and I'll work on this helmet just a little bit to show that. You can see the chalkiness in here. If you take a look at the back of this helmet, I've got some chalkiness right here from a highlight transition that just wasn't super smooth. You're noticing on this model, even though we went really bright, we never broke down and got that chalkiness. The reason that you get chalkiness when you're highlighting, especially with like a blue, you'll really notice it with the blue. Reds, you don't notice it as much. The transition, again, it goes into that transition of color and how long you can run a highlight. In past videos, I kind of talked about that, about how quickly blues and blacks and stuff will highlight. Your transitions are really fast, really sharp. You have a long distance. Like I'll show you the example here. On this leg plate, you have a very long distance of your mid color, and it's not until the very edge that I hit my highlights. They're like bam, 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 real fast. I transition from my moderate mid-tone, and then I do like 6 tonal transitions all the way up to this point here. They have to be very fast. If you make it really long, you change the color of the model. If I make these highlights really long, this model won't be black. It will be gray. It'll read as more of a white model that's just very shadowed. So we have to make sure that our transitions are really fast to our highlight side, whereas our shadow side can be very long because we're doing a dark color. Whereas if we do a light color, yeah, this will work right here. Whereas if we do a light color, like this guy with the white, you'll see that my highlights are very, very long and my shadows are really fast, to create that color transition. That way this reads white. If I were to let my shadows be really long and my mid-tone and my highlights really short, it's going to look like a brown model that has a little bit of white highlight to it. So that's what we run into, especially with blues and blacks and stuff like that. Because those transitions are so fast, if we go out of sequence in our steps with our color, we'll get chalkiness. By that I mean, if you imagine our color transition from a color, say a pot color of soft blue to a pot color of ghost white. If we were to imagine it as a pyramid, and we made a pyramid, and the pyramid had really tall blocks, it's going to be a chunky pyramid. It's going to look something like this. It's going to look something like this. I mean, that's still a pyramid, but when you look at it, you see that it's a block pyramid. Whereas if we shorten these and make a whole bunch of little transitions, it's still a square pyramid, but it takes on more of a pyramid shape. It's not blocky like this. So when we're doing our color transitions, we need to make sure that in between this step and this step, that we have all of these little steps to create that walk. So this might be pure soft blue. This right here might be pure ghost white. So now this is like 90% soft blue, 85%, 75%, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, until we finally hit 0% soft blue, right? That's going to be our transitions. If we miss some of these steps and we go from 90% soft blue all the way to 30% soft blue with our next step, as soon as that color lays over that darker color below it, it's going to be chalky. Our surface isn't perfectly smooth. Even though it looks perfectly smooth, when we did our base coat and stuff like that, we were real careful with our base coat. There's still little micro dots in there. There's going to be micro abrasions and bumps and stuff like that. As we're glazing our paint in and as we're setting that paint into the model, those little dots start to show up. They start to collect paint, and as we glaze over, the pigment from the paint collects on it. That's why it's really important if we're doing like a French blending style paint job that we make sure our base coats are as smooth as we can possibly get. We don't want them being really rough. But it gets to the point where we've done our base coats right, but we're still getting that chalky look. If we get that chalky look, it's very easy to fix. It just means that we went too fast in our progression. If we get that chalky look, we can fix it by just coming back with that mid-tone again. So here I have that chalky look. You can see it right here on the top of this model. I have that chalky look. I'm going to take a glaze of one of my lower colors, something that's underneath it. And I'm just going to take and do a couple of quick glazes. And as we glaze over it, and we want to make sure that we don't just go into the highlight, but we glaze also into the shadow, because we want this step to be as smooth as possible on both sides. And this might take a few coats to really soften up, but all we do is we come in and just glaze across that chalkiness. Once we do that, it might take 1 or 2 coats, but you'll notice that chalkiness will start to disappear. Yes, we do take our tone back down again. We kind of lose the step we did, but then we can go back and do it right. We can come back in with the right color steps and maybe make that transition color between the 2 colors that you just put in, make another transition between those and put that back onto the model, and it won't be as chalky. So I can come back in now with my highlight color and start to add my highlight color in. And that is way too much of a step. Whoops, I'm off the thing. You see how I'm right back to that same problem? That step was just too fast. Those colors were just too off. So what I'll do is I'll try to glaze out as much of that line as I can. Soften up some of this paint. Then once that's dry, I'll do the same exact thing. I'm going to come back in with that glaze of that mid-tone color, that underneath color. Now you want to make sure the paint's fully dry. We don't want to put wet paint or new paint over wet paint again. I can just come in, do another glaze right over the top, and it'll start to soften that chalkiness up. So you're starting to see that chalkiness is kind of starting to go away. And I might have to work this back and forth about 3 or 4 times before I finally get it. And I will also walk that color back and forth a few times too. I might take more of the highlight color and add that again, even though it's slightly chalky. Or I might just glaze out and put some of that undertone, that mid-tone back in. And that will help to soften that model back up. Once we do that, we can get back to the point where we can start to work on the model again. So I hope that answered your question. I know that was kind of a roundabout way of answering it. But that's how that's why you get the chalkiness that you get, and that's how you kind of fix that chalkiness. We're doing the same thing here with the airbrushing, because that airbrush in essence is creating that chalkiness, right? This transition right here is really fast compared to the other colors. We're going to have that chalkiness. So we'll do that same thing that we're going to do here. Just like what I did here on the chest, I'm going to come in, and you can see it on the arm now. I'm going to come in, and I'm just going to lightly glaze my mid-tone color. And I'm trying to be careful not to cover up too much of the highlight. We want to keep some of that highlight. But if we just take that mid-tone color in, now we're starting to get that transition. You can start to see how that model is starting to transition in color. And I'll work that again through those same steps that we did before. I'll work it down. Once I have that darker blue in, I'm going to come in with that really dark blue. And first I'm going to establish my shadow, which is right along that ridge of that arm plate. I'm going to paint that shadow in. And then from basic blending, right, the tip of we always want the tip of our brush working towards, so if we're applying a shadow, we want the tip of our brush towards the shadow. I'm going to adjust this model so I can do that, and just softly glaze up away from that shadow that I just painted. And that helps to soften that transition up. So now you're starting to see that that transition is starting to roll. And that's where we want to be. And this will be a bit, again, a little bit of back and forth, back and forth. I'm going to establish this shadow right along the inside of this bicep. This is that really dark blue. The airbrush really didn't get in here to create this shadow. So I want to make sure that I'm setting that shadow. And then I'll take my transition color. Glaze that in until we soften up that. So now you're starting to see a nice roll, a nice shape to that arm. You can see it there, that arm is starting to take on a nice shape. Now I'll come in with that highlight color. Again, it's like probably 75, 80% soft blue to maybe 20%, 25% of that ghost white. And I'm going to apply that highlight. Now this is a little tougher here because we've got to kind of maneuver the model around, set the point of our brush. It's really important when we're doing all this blending and glazing that we keep the tip of our brush pointed in the right direction, because we really don't want a hard line here. We've done so much work, and the airbrush has created such nice transition that if we create a really hard line, it's going to be really hard to get rid of that line. If we're doing more of that masculine armor that I was talking about with the really harsh transitions, the lines aren't bad. We can have those in there. They're going to create movement. They're going to create shape. They're going to create light. But with her, we don't really want those hard reflective lines. Again, we want this armor to stay just slightly effeminate. So I'm just going to come in again with more of the glazes, being careful not to hit the highlight, and just soften this out again until we have that nice transition. You can see there we are. You can see that transition now. We have a really nice transition of the bicep of that armor. Now, what we're missing is we need that really dark line right here to separate those armor plates. As soon as we get that transition in, we're going to come in and we're going to put in our darkest recess with that black. And then I'm going to kind of roll this way. And right where those two plates match, I'm just going to take that undercut and put a dark line there. Because now you can see that the armor plates start to take shape. We still have that softness, but we still have that hard edge that an armor plate would have. Just like on the leg here, we have this softness in these transitions. On this leg, we have the softness in transitions, but we still have these hard edges. We have to have those hard edges to reflect, to give the idea that it's armor. So this can still be a very feminine armor and have those hard lines without being harsh, without being kind of glaring to the eye. We want the focus to be on her face. We don't want the focus to be on the armor. And if you paint a really nice, soft, smooth face with a whole bunch of hard armor around it, the focus is going to go to the hard armor. So if we can just kind of soften that up, smooth those transitions, we'll get better movement out of our model. We'll get better shape. So here I've got this done. I really like everything, but we're still missing just a little bit of depth. So if you look at that arm, there's still just a little bit of depth missing. So we're going to take and add some of that red. I'm going to be really careful here because I don't want this red getting really high up on the arm. If this red gets too high up on the arm, it's going to turn it purple.
Can you
we'll kind of lose.
can you lift the model? Yeah, there you go. Thanks.
Once we get that red in, I'm going to come back over with that soft blue that I have. And I'm just going to filter that shadow. I don't want to go all the way into the darkest recess of the shadow. I just want to hit that edge, that transition point. And I want to make sure that I keep it relatively transparent so that we're seeing some of that red show through beneath. So that's looking pretty good. I lost a little bit of highlight right here. So I'm just going to come back and reestablish some of the highlight. Again, this is going to be back and forth quite a bit when you're working on your own model. You're not going to get this on the first go. You're not going to be able to just hit these edges, do your highlights, do your midtones, and then bam, move on. The more you can work it back and forth, the more you can do these transitions from dark to light to dark to light to dark to light, the smoother it will get, the deeper your shadows will be, the more saturated your highlights will be. So we want to work that back and forth. And then once we're done with that, we can go in and start our final highlights. Now, with our final highlight, I want to not go with just the pure ghost white quite yet. I'm going to do like 75% ghost white and maybe just 25% of that soft blue. And I'm just going to go in and use the side of my brush and catch some of these edges that are going to be highlighted. And this is going to help us to create separation of the armor plates and give us a little more shape and a little more volume. The reason I don't go with just the pure ghost white is it's going to be too stark and it's going to really clash. If I can do this mixed color, it'll create those same highlights, but it'll just soften them just a little bit. Again, we're looking for that softness of the model. We don't want it to be super hard, because then it becomes harsh and it's glaring to the eye. So once I've got those edges on, you can see right there, it's kind of starting to take shape with the edges. Now I'm going to come in with some of just that pure ghost white. I'm not going to go to pure white on this model. If I go pure white, we're going to really have some really heavy contrasting colors, and it'll become a little too glaring. A lot of people will go to pure white. I just think with this, that the pure light dots would be too bright. They'll just be too dominant. But I will put just a little bit of pure white in just a couple of reflection points. So you notice there, I didn't go all the way and trace the entire model. I just hit a couple points where light would really collect. That's going to help us create shape. It's also going to make the eye scoot this way. So if for some reason your eye is coming off to this side of the model here, as soon as we hit those two light points, our eyes come back across, and we'll go up to her face, which would be right there. You'll end up going back in and focusing on her face again. So I mean, that's pretty much it. It's almost the same technique as what we did with the black armor on the assassins, but this time we went with a more saturated blue. We didn't go with such a gray blue. We went with a lot brighter of a blue, a more saturated blue. I wouldn't say bright, a more saturated blue. And because of that, we just changed our red a little bit to compensate for it. And now we have a model that still, even though there's a lot of blues in it, it still reads as black, especially when you look at like the helmet. The helmet really reads as black. So I'll come in with this and I'll keep working on it. Of course, I'll bring in a lot more shadows. I need shadows here. I need shadows here. I need shadows in here. I need just a little bit of highlights here and here. Just a little bit. We want to make sure that I don't go too far here, because that will be subdued because of the helmet, because of the head. We want to make sure that the eye is drawn up to the face. If we do anything, you'll notice right here, I didn't put any of that really bright highlight. This is just that 50-50 mix. I don't want to go above that. in this area right here, because the eye will fix there. Right now, as you look at this model without the helmet on it, that's definitely the focal point of the eye. So we want to make sure that we carry that eye all the way up to the face. Once these highlights are in along the forearms and stuff, it will help carry that focus up to the helmet. The back of the helmet will bring your eyes to her face, and then you've accomplished what you wanted to do. So that's pretty much kind of my process with this figure. So we'll go ahead and open it up if you guys have any questions.
What was, did you do like zenithal lighting on that, or what was your method for priming for that one? And did that like come into play with painting it?
Yeah, we talked about that right at the beginning of the tutorial. I know some people came in kind of late. Yes, we always start off, one, I airbrush the model. Whenever I'm airbrushing a model, I always start off with a black primer. I did do the zenithal highlighting. Zenithal highlighting is just, you spray it all black. Here's a good example of zenithal highlighting. You spray the entire model black, and then from the top, we're going to shoot it with white, and we're going to create all of our highlights. Then you can come in with the airbrush, and you'll hit certain spots that need to be more highlighted. We'll hit those with the airbrush just to brighten it up. Then I'll actually come in and airbrush my color over the top of these. My shadow and highlights are already created. You get something a lot to this shape. And then I just need to expand on that by using my shadow and my highlight colors. That's where the corporeal shadow came in. Of course, the soft blue is just the base tone that we used. And then if you really want to push your highlights, you could take some of this ghost white. I didn't do it on this model because you can see how bright the ghost white gets. If I were to airbrush the ghost white on that, I'd have to take and work that entire area that got airbrushed with that brightness down before I can bring it up. I mean, even with just the blue on top of the zenithal highlighting, you can see how much brighter this arm is than the arm that we worked, because I had to put those shadows in there to kind of bring it down a little bit so we create more shape. I didn't want it that bright, but the zenithal highlighting set us at that temperature, at that tonal value.
Caleb, what kind of medium do you use for your glazing, or you just use water, and what kind of ratio?
Just water. Just water.
Water.
Yeah, there's no ratio to it. I'll just come back to my palette. When I'm creating my glaze, I'm just going to take a little bit of water. I'm going to grab some of my paint, and I'm going to pull it. I'm just going to pull some of that puddle of paint, mix it into that puddle I made. I want the puddle of paint down here, not up here, because it'll start to mix with the main body of the paint. So if you load your water down here and then pull your paint into your water, you can create that nice glaze. And you can see it's about that big when I apply it on the model. You can see it's
and what
pretty.
Causes a glaze? What causes a glaze to be chalky sometimes? Is that just the pigment breaking apart on you?
Nope, your transition is too fast.
Okay.
I'm assuming you're talking about like on a highlight. You're trying to glaze in your highlight.
Exactly.
And it becomes chalky. It's because your steps are too far. Remember that pyramid that we talked about?
Exactly. Okay.
Find that middle tone. Your glazes are you went too fast in your color transitions.
Mm-hmm.
So find a mix in between there. So if you're 50-50 a color and that's your glaze, back it off and go with 75% of the darker color to 25%. Apply that first, then bump up to maybe the 50-50, or maybe the 50-50 still isn't enough. You're going to notice in reds and stuff like that, you really get away with really fast transitions, and it'll still glaze pretty well. But once you get into
in the event that you do get something chalky like that, can you just glaze back over your base color? Take it back.
Just take. Okay. You don't even need to go to your base color. Say that you've already worked your glaze up quite a ways away from your base color. Okay. You're getting more towards your highlight color, and you get that chalkiness. Just go back to your last step. Okay. Whatever that color is that you're applying over the top, go back to that color, glaze that color back in. What's going to happen is that highlight color that you already put in is going to show through a little bit through that glaze that you're putting over the top, even though it's a darker color. It's still going to be brighter than the color beneath it because you've already put that highlight color in. But what it's going to do is it's going to go in and it's going to fill in those voids that were catching the really bright areas. It's going to help fill in some of those voids with a little bit of that little bit darker color.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So yeah, you just go back in and just reglaze with the lower color and then work your highlight back up again, and you'll be good to go.
Great. Thanks.
All right. Do we have any more questions?
Was there any particular reason for using that Andrew red?
Actually, I used a Reaper color red, the Gothic Crimson.
One of the Halloween ones.
The reason, if you watched my last painting black video, you'll see that I used a very bright red. Because I was going on that gray blue, a bright red works. In our shadows, when we're painting black, we want to make sure that we put a transition color that's almost a counter color to the base color that we use. For my blacks, I like a blue based gray, so I use my favorite is that shadow gray, the old GW color. In fact, I just found out about this after that class. We were talking about what colors to use.
Yeah.
Reaper made a shadow gray that's very close to it called Twilight Blue. This is pretty much shadow gray. It's the closest color I found to shadow gray. This is a great base color when I'm painting blacks. This will be the primary color. This is going to be my mid-tone color. Then what we do, Alex, is we come in and once we get our transition, so I'll add some black to this gray and I'll start to transition in my shadows. And then I have a transition point where my shadow goes from pure black to a gray black. Right in that transition area is where I glaze in red. You're just barely going to see it. I mean, right in here, it'd be this transition area right here in the leg. And I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but right here in the leg, this has got a lot of red in it. What happens is it deepens that shadow. It makes it black. If I just go from that gray to black, it becomes very desaturated. And then our shadow is desaturated and it's boring. It almost looks like we're painting monochromatic. You'll notice that when you start painting your models with black and you just use pure gray to highlight them, your models become very desaturated. They're not interesting. Whereas when you go out and walk around and look at black, someone's shirt or a jacket, a leather coat, whatever, if you start to really look at that, you'll see all the ambient colors around, all the reflected light colors, everything that black absorbs, because black absorbs all color spectrum. Well, sometimes some of that color spectrum is going to escape and your eye will recognize that. So by glazing in just a little bit of red right at that transition color, it makes our shadows deeper in our blacks and makes them read proper to the human eye. So that's why we did the red. Now, this particular red, the reason I used this Gothic Crimson on this model was because instead of using a very gray, like you can see the difference in these two colors, this is the base color I normally use. It's a very gray blue. You can see how blue the soft blue is. Because I went very blue, if I go with a bright red, it's just going to turn purple. If I put bright red on top of this, even with that black in the shadow, it's going to become very purple, and your eye is going to read purple. And
so you want to work with two colors that when you're basically mixing together to make that transition, that they're not going to make that new color and get more
You're
depth.
still going to make that new color a little bit, but by going with a darker red with a little bit of blue already added to it, it's less of a transitional jump. You see that?
Right.
As opposed,
it's not nearly as sharp of a change.
As opposed to that.
Yeah.
So that's the reasoning behind it.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I think that might be it.
All right. Oh, what did we just ask? Does it sparkle in sunlight?
Yeah, the twilight blue.
Uh-huh.
Oh, the twilight blue.
Yeah, sorry, bad joke.
That was great.
It was one of the stupidest things about that series that I could think of. It sparkles.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Caleb. And
All right. Well,
do you
Yeah, thanks,
mind?
Caleb.
thank you guys for tuning in. And if you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to contact us if you have more questions. If there's something that you want to ask about this particular tutorial or any of the other tutorials we have, you can always reach us on Facebook. Go over to CK Studios and message us there. That's probably the easiest way, right, Kat?
Yep, that's a perfect way to find us. All right, guys. Thanks so much.
Awesome.